Welcome to Paradox. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 772-220-WSTU. And now your hosts for Paradox, Dr. Ira Pearlstine and Dr. Leighan Talton.
And we're back in the studio. These weeks really roll by, particularly during our busy season. And last week, we joked around that it was cold and flu season. And I think my partner here either has a bad cold or the flu or maybe something worse. Thank you so much for attempting to come into the studio. If you have a paroxysm of cough, I guess I'm going to be doing this show alone.
I know. I was so worried on the way over. I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to contain this coughing fit as it happens.
It's a deep breath, but I heard you had a good week and you had a family reunion.
I did. We had a great weekend. All the women in I grew up in a very female dominated family. Are you surprised to hear that, Ira?
No,
yeah.
I grew up in a very female-dominated family as well.
That's why we like each other. Yeah, so all my aunts and cousins, we all went to Mount Dora and did their antique extravaganza on Friday, and then had, dinners and, drinking and games, and it was wonderful. Family is so great if you're lucky enough to live around them.
You always tease me about I'm the traveler and you're not, but you seem to be getting away more than I do. I've never been to Mount Dora. I heard it's great.
It is. And so I have a disorder called holiday over decorating syndrome, which I think is a cross between loving the holidays and actually being a hoarder. So like an antique fair is it's like crack for me. Like I can't have any restraint.
Did you buy a lot of stuff?
I didn't buy a lot of stuff. A lot of the things that I looked for, the vendors weren't there, but I'm kind of in a new vibe right now. So that was kind of fun. I bought some new stuff.
I made a nice major purchase this weekend.
Tell me about it.
I bought a piece of art from an upcoming budding young artist collective. It's a combination male and female artist collective that aims to reveal the destruction of our natural environment from advertisements and commercialism.
Cool.
Yeah, their body of art focuses on the injustices in our society and how the system is broken. And their art is characterized by a black or brown crack, which represents the crack in the system. The name of the collective, Death by Letters. These people are up and coming. I was very impressed. And in each of their pieces, this black crack, or brown crack in my piece, is added to the canvas to represent the damaged system that we live in. And these guys are cool. Where'd
you see them?
Well, I was at a friend's home, and it's his daughter. These artists have a background in the streets of writing graffiti, and several of their works include graffiti letters.
Cool. Do they have a website?
They don't yet, but they will soon. The style of their work is a combination of pop art, minimalism, and graffiti. And many of their pieces include familiar animated characters from cartoons that you and I have seen and grown up with, connecting the viewer to the art. No SpongeBob, though. I've got to get them to do a SpongeBob piece. So the artists are Elmus, and she spells that L-M-U-S. She's a female artist from here in South Florida who got a BA degree in visual arts at the University of San Diego. And her partner, Ernie, E-R-N-I, who's a Mexican-American self-taught artist from Los Angeles. These people are great. If you see their art, they're up and coming. It's wonderful.
Now you have a rant prepared for us.
I have a
today.
rant prepared.
Let's hear it. So, by the way, when you told me you were going to do a rant on this article, I was excited because I had already read the article and felt a little ramped up about it myself. But yeah, so it was interesting that we both kind of saw and were inspired by the same thing.
Well, we work hard at what we do, and we really try to take care of our patients.
We as physicians?
We as physicians, and you and I as direct primary care physicians in particular, because we're always on. We're always available.
Mm-hmm.
So the title of the article is Keep Up the Insults and Good Luck Finding a Physician in 10 Years.
What insults?
Well, it was written by Karen Sullivan Seibert. She's a doctor. She's actually an anesthesiologist who writes a column. And I found this.
It was in Kevin MD, right?
It was in Kevin MD. But I found this one. This was actually published elsewhere. And it was published recently, January 17th of 2020. Because there have been recent articles in the Washington Post and in the New York Times bashing doctors. And I've got to tell you, Leighann, I'm a little tired of the doctor
Yeah,
bashing.
they were talking about an article in particular that was, what was it talking about? Like physician kickback, or what was
Well,
the
it was
theme of it?
talking about a doctor
Mm-hmm.
who performed an emergent appendectomy
Mm-hmm.
on a patient, and the insurance company wouldn't pay the bill because they didn't cover that patient
Right.
at the hospital she went to
Right.
emergently.
Right.
And see, these recent attacks, and I'm going to quote from the article here. In
Sure.
fact, I'm going to actually read a lot from the article. But these recent attacks on physicians by economists, particularly Ann Case and Angus Deaton, and media professional Cynthia Weber Cassio, deserve to be called out. You know, you can almost make a case for consigning them permanently, along with our anti-vaccination zealots, to a healthcare-free planet, which, of course, would be supplied with essential oils, mustard poultices, and leeches. And I'm quoting from the article. In fact, I'm reading from the article. And I quote Dr. Seibert as saying, "My real quarrel with them and with the Washington Post, which published their comments, is that they have the courage of the non-combatants, the people who criticize but have no idea what it's like to do a physician's work." Ms. Cassio was enraged by the bill from her general surgeon, who wasn't in her insurance network at the time she needed to have that emergency appendectomy. She doesn't care, and why would she? That insurance companies increasingly won't negotiate fair contracts. And it isn't the surgeon's fault that the state where this occurred, Maryland, hasn't passed a rational out-of-network payment law like they did in New York, which should be the model for national legislation. Nor does Mrs. Cassio care that Maryland's malpractice insurance rates are high compared with other states, averaging more than $50,000 per year per general surgeon. She just wants to portray her surgeon as a villain. Hey, Leighann, what do you think a surgeon makes for taking out an appendix? What do you think the surgeon actually ends up getting paid?
Yikes.
Take a guess.
I'm going to say a couple $100.
Yeah, it's a couple $100. I think it's like right at $300. That's the same as a gallbladder. And see, the two economists who are also quoted in this article are indignant that American physicians make more money than their European colleagues.
Oh,
Well-
yeah. And that's I think that's a big bone of contention, across the board, that it seems like physicians belong in the wealthy, they're typically wealthy. They live in the wealthier neighborhoods. I mean, even somebody at my age, sometimes I'll get quips about, oh, you have a nice house for somebody that's your age. Meanwhile, they don't understand that, number one, I'm still paying off crippling debt, like crippling debt. Like
six figures, mid six figure
leaving
debt.
med school with $260,000 worth of debt. And on top of that, having spent the last 10, 12 years making a low salary and essentially having not a lot of fun doing it.
And the other complaint about the economists is, how could they charge so much in a procedure that only took 30 minutes or less?
Yeah.
I always thought that good judgment comes from bad judgment. That comes from experience. If my plane's going down, I want Captain Sully flying my plane. I don't want the stewardess doing it. And to quote from the article again, I wonder sometimes what it would be like to go to work in the mornings and not to have to worry that I might kill someone, says the anesthesiologist who wrote this article. If journalists or economists get their facts or predictions wrong, it's annoying, but it won't be fatal. If anesthesiologists have trouble getting enough oxygen into the patient's airway for very long, permanent brain damage or death results. And that's a stress level that she has. But surgeons, OBGYNs, they have the stress level of puncturing the aorta. Family doctors, such as myself and Dr. Leighann here, someone comes in with a cough, it could be a virus, it could be lung cancer. How do you know when to test and when not to test? It's the experience that you're paying for, and it's that education. And let me tell you something, folks out there. What really irritates me and irks me the most are insurance executives, the CEO of this particular insurance company makes $14 million a year. Physicians, all told, take up in our healthcare system less than 1% of the overall cost of healthcare. See, at one time, and I'm quoting me now, we were the ball players, but we yielded to big business. And now I don't even think we're the peanut vendors. So primary care physicians aren't exempt from fear and stress. A patient comes in, we have to know what to order. If an insurance company will even let us order it. So that's my rant for tonight.
So the main gist of this article was something that we have alluded to in the past, which is essentially that there is a public discussion happening out there that is anti-physician. And that's really, to me, it kind of comes as a shock because, I spend all day among people who are really happy to see me. And they're so grateful for what I do. And, and it's not just me, it's their other physicians as well. So it's almost like the public portrayal, or maybe it is the younger generations of people that are passing this judgment. But I agree that we're seeing more, shameless bashing of physicians as a profession. And we contrasted it in a previous episode to the fact that we don't really see the same thing going on with allied health professionals like nurse practitioners, PAs, physical therapists, dentists, etc. There's something specific about physicians that's rubbing these people the wrong way.
And I'm not sure you see it going on with the type of medicine that we practice, direct primary care medicine. One, you and I, with what we do, we're totally transparent. It's a membership fee only. And the other way that we don't see this is the fact that our patients really know us. It's not like we're here today and gone tomorrow.
So, an interesting perspective on this particular topic might be from our esteemed guest today, right?
It could be.
Because who is our guest?
Well, our guest tonight is not only an esteemed psychiatrist, but he's a lifelong friend of mine who's now in Hampton, Connecticut. It's Dr. Perry Mandanis. And the cool thing about Dr. Mandanis, he has his own podcast, which is so much, I think, better than our podcast. I've listened to his podcast twice now. On his second podcast, I literally had tears in my eyes. Welcome to our show, Dr. Mandanis.
Hi, guys. Thanks a lot for having me on.
What do you think about his rant? What do you think about what he's saying about this anti-physician mantra going on in the media right now?
I think there's an anti-science mantra going on in the media right now. And I think it's been promoted in lots of different arenas, actually. Anti-climate change, anti-vaccines, anti-doctors. People seem to think that their feelings or their beliefs equal, their Google search is the same as our education. And so it's just not the same thing. And I do think there's a kind of anti-science, and doctors are the experts in their field. And so people want to take down the head waiter. They're not going to take down the allied health professionals. And I think that might be why we're getting it directed at us rather than all the other people.
Do you think it also has a lot to do with the fact that primary relationship between patient and physician is being eroded by the lack of time people are now spending face to face with their doctors? In other words,
Totally.
we all have a lot of chutzpah in our cars, sending signals out the window to other drivers that we'll never meet. But, face to face, it's a lot more difficult to hurl these insults. And I think people aren't spending that face to face time with physicians anymore. So it's a lot easier to make enemies out of them.
I agree.
Well, one thing about Dr. Mandanis, he always has such a positive attitude, and he brings things back. In fact, his podcasts deal with the human condition and how resilience and strength and fortitude and just a good story can sometimes change people's lives. I met Dr. Mandanis when I was about 3 years old. Our grandmothers grew up, or when they were in their 20s, on the same street. It was that Greek-Jewish connection in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And it was old Columbia, wasn't it, Perry?
It was. That was a time in the South where there was a lot of discrimination. against people who weren't white Southerners. And so Greek people, Jewish people, Syrian people, that neighborhood was full of people of all different ethnicities who were successful business people, had come to the United States to chase the American dream, build a house, raise a family, but got excluded from some of the posh neighborhoods in the city, and they just developed their own. And so, yeah, our grandmothers were 3-4 houses apart.
3-4 houses apart. And
I remember your grandmother really well. She used to help me buy my jeans at her store, Molidi's, downtown.
That's great. And, you know, all the Greek families, they had the restaurants, and all the
That's
Jewish
right.
families had the retail businesses in that generation. And our generation, we were the doctors and the lawyers. It's pretty interesting how our families, and meaning your family, my family, put such an emphasis on education. And so when Perry's mom was a young child, and my mother was a young child, they grew up together, and hence Perry and I kind of grew up together. It was kind of a neat three generation thing. And then I had lost touch with Dr. Mandanis for years, and then due to social media, I found him on Facebook. I'd say about 7-8 years ago, and we reconnected.
Yep. And that was great to track each other down again. I mean, our mothers are best friends. So it's sad that, you know, we lost touch. It's really great that we are back on again.
I agree. So you trained at Brown University after being a pediatrician. Did you ever practice pediatrics?
I didn't. I completed a residency in pediatrics, and then I realized early on that would be true. I could not deal with the fact that children died quite often and quite quickly. I knew that was not something I was going to be able to do. So I thought I was getting into was, you know, bouncing babies on their knees, teaching people when it's time to start, you know, vegetables and fruit, but an earache here and a stomachache there. But there's another part of pediatrics that I didn't think I could do for my whole career. And I realized I enjoyed talking with children and their parents a lot more than studying their diseases. And I quickly morphed my career and took a new direction and came up to Rhode Island to study child psychiatry at Brown University. So that's how I kind of had that path, but I never practiced pediatrics.
Did you always want to practice in the Northeast? Because that's where you are.
I can't really say that, but I'm in the Northeast because it was a comfortable place for me. You know, I think I grew up in the South where I think of people as either white or black. And in the Northeast, I quickly discovered that we up here celebrate diversity perhaps a little bit more loudly than in the South that I grew up in anyway. And I gravitated to the Northeast mostly because it was a social scene that I connected to more closely.
So you have quite the story to tell, and you talk about it on your first episode of Couch Stories, but tell our listeners what happened to you just before you went into practice. The day before, I believe, you were supposed to open your office.
Timing is everything, right, Ira? I mean, yeah. So I had finished 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of pediatrics, 2 years of child psychiatry, 2 years of adult and family psychiatry. And it was literally the end of June when it was time for me to finally hang a shingle after all of this education and launch my private practice in child psychiatry. I got an office, I had decorated it, and I had one last thing to do right before I graduated, and that was move the desk into the office. And while I was moving the desk into my office, unfortunately, I missed a step and I fell down really hard and injured my back and my spinal cord. And unfortunately, even after surgery, they were able to help me some, but some of my spinal cord remained damaged, and I became wheelchair dependent the day before I graduated. And have spent the rest of my life in a wheelchair. So that was a weird turn of events that happened right before I was supposed to start my career.
And that delayed your opening almost 1 year to the day because you were
1 year to the day.
you were
Definitely.
in
1 year to the day.
rehabilitation and and you thought you were going to get better and you didn't get better and you had to resolve yourself, as you say in your podcast, that you were going to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair, which had to
Easy.
no.
You know, I tell it like in Couch Stories, the first episode when I introduced myself. I talk about the fact that I rented a wheelchair for 11, well, not quite 11 months, but 9 months, because I didn't think I was going to need one. And when my physical therapist sort of insisted that I buy a wheelchair, it was then that I realized, this is as good as it's going to get. And I got depressed, and I started to pay attention to the nursing station. Because I was a doctor, I could steal whatever I needed from the nursing station once I knew when they were going to be away. If I changed my mind about whether or not I was going to be able to do this life in a wheelchair, I could commit suicide. And that was a very, very dark moment in this period of my life. Thankfully, I spoke up. I let somebody know that I was in trouble. The doctor helped me immensely. And she was a therapist at a spinal cord injury hospital. So everybody he dealt with was dealing with what I had going on. Everybody was new to being spinal cord injured. Everybody was new to being in a wheelchair. And he told me that people who have had my injury usually end up in one of two groups. In group one are the people who stayed mad and angry about it and never really have a good life. And then he called the other people the group two people. Those are people who radically accept what has happened and figure out how to be happy people in wheelchairs. So radical acceptance was the first step, and that's a tough step. That's what I talk about in Couch Stories and in that first episode. And that's really what the whole podcast is about, by the way. It's about resilience and overcoming something that's tough to overcome. And when you think you can't, how do you get through it? I think that that's a powerful story for people to hear if they're struggling with something.
So you also mentioned in Couch Stories that you love to dance and you're no longer able to dance, but you sing, and boy, do you sing. And you tried out for The Voice.
I did try out for The Voice. I sent them a tape, and when you send them a tape, they decide if you can audition at the front of the line, and I made it to the front of the line, and I auditioned 2 or 3 times the way they do it, but I got cut before the television show rounds. But it was a fun experience.
And I've heard you sing. Do you still have your band?
I do. I'm in a band. Up here, we perform from time to time. It's an R&B band, and we're called Big Jump. So big shout out to my friends in Big Jump. And it's a great thing to do from time to time.
Hey, listen. And if you've just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Perry Mandanis, psychiatrist from his home in Connecticut. And we're going to need to take a short commercial break right here at WSTU. We'll be right back in just about 60 seconds. So you're doing really good. We're about halfway there, and now we're going to talk about your episodes and anything else you want to throw in. You good with that, Perry?
Okay.
Okay. Good.
You've been in the same spot this whole time because we are getting a little bit of feedback somehow.
Okay. Do you know, is it me?
Sounds like it might be.
I'm hearing.
Sometimes the orientation of the phone, just turning left to right, sometimes just changes the way the cell tower picks up the signal too.
Yeah, we're hearing some like crackly type noises.
I just now heard the crackly noise. I thought it was you guys. Now it's gone away.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, now it has.
Okay.
Okay. And Is there anything else you want to talk about that I didn't send to you, or anything you want me to not talk
I'm
about?
good. I think we got plenty here.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I do too. And Leighan, you're doing great with the cough so far.
Thank you.
You've really suppressed it well.
Thank you. Well, it's sort of like my sneezes. I sneeze really quietly, and people are like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "This is called a surgical sneeze." And when you are the resident in the room and the scrub tech is finding any reason to make you look like a total, jerk in front
are
of
we
your
totally
surgeon.
off air? YouTube's off now too.
No, hang on.
That doesn't matter.
Okay.
You just shouldn't. If you need to ask if YouTube is still
Okay.
running,
Yeah.
that should be like your filter for life.
Right. Yeah.
Perry, are you surprised to know that Ira's gotten himself in trouble with off-color jokes?
Oh no.
No. All right. Okay, you ready?
Okay. On the air, yeah.
Yeah, we're ready. We're gonna
Partially on the air.
okay, partially on the air. We're gonna. This is a. Let me. No, I've got to reset the timer. Stop. Reset. Whenever you're ready.
Yep. Okay.
And welcome back. We're here at Paradox talking to the author and host, the psychiatrist of Couch Stories, Dr. Perry Mandanis.
And childhood friend of yours.
And childhood friend.
And psychiatrist.
And psychiatrist and singer.
And our very first remote guest. So, thank
wow.
you. Yes. Thank you to our audience for hanging in there because, we know that the sound quality isn't quite what you're used to since we usually do these recordings in studio. So I appreciate everybody that's hanging in there. But this is great because I think it could open up a whole new world of interviews if we were able to do, remote podcast interviews on this Paradox show.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so I want to ask you, Perry,
Yep.
what was the idea behind Couch Stories, the concept?
Well, I am a psychiatrist with 25, 30 years of experience. And one of the things I learned working with patients over all these years is often a lecture or medical information or, data doesn't really resonate with them very much, or they just reject it. And if I can sneak a good story in that causes their brain to itch or makes them see something a new way, I learned that story can sometimes be much more powerful than any facts or figures that I can offer people. So in my work with patients, I very often use stories or metaphors to engage them because stories are memorable. You remember the stories, even if you don't remember the medical facts. The stories kind of stick with you. They penetrate, And I've been using stories and studying stories, and it's an important part of my work. So it was a natural way for me to morph into this podcast. I mean, I am a song and dance fan, like you mentioned. And so putting that part of me together with my experience in medicine and the podcast Couch Stories emerged.
So give our listeners who haven't listened to your podcast a little bit of an overview. So your podcast is called Couch Stories, and what is the general theme? How many episodes have you done? What do you try to focus on? How has this evolved?
Okay. So the general theme is going to be telling stories of resilience and grit, telling stories about overcoming a challenge. And I have overcome quite a few of them. And there's going to be 2 episodes per month. So far, I've only aired 2 of them, the first 2. And then in the future, I'm going to tell more generic teaching stories, the kind of stories that I've shared with lots of people. The first 4 stories are all autobiographical because I just want people to get to know me as a real person. And then I'm going to begin doing interviews just like you guys are interviewing me tonight. I'm going to start interviewing authors, other people that have interesting stories of resilience to tell, because, a lot of people have overcome a major challenge in life. And I think it's inspiring to hear how someone overcame that, what they learned from it, what they would share with your listeners about it, what they would do differently. And so Couch Stories is going to be a place for people to share those kinds of stories.
And I assume you chose the name because of the psychiatrist couch.
Exactly.
Aha.
Yes, exactly.
Which is
yes.
funny because that's what I always tell patients are not going to happen. I say, I'm going to send you to see a psychiatrist. They're not going to shrink your head, and you are not going to lie on a fainting couch.
I do have one in my office, though. It's cliche, but I do have a
People probably
couch
like
that
it,
fits.
don't they?
Well, very few people use it, but it's fun.
Now, I know at one time you were considering retirement in your near future. So would this be a departure from that plan for you, or how does that fit into your overall game plan in the future?
I'm still young enough to continue to practice medicine for a few more years, but I do think this is an opportunity for me to continue to help people in a way that I enjoy without having the daily grind of seeing patients in and out all day long. So, yeah, I mean, if Couch Stories takes off, and I hope it does, and I hope your listeners will sign up for Couch Stories. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and the OAM network. Sign up for Couch Stories, because if it takes off, I think this might be my retirement plan, you guys, is continue to tell stories, interview other people for their stories, and hopefully help people with stories that aren't just good, but they're good for you.
Well, I've listened to both of your episodes now, and they're absolutely brilliant. If you took it to the next level, what do you think that would be for you?
Well, my next thing is going to be the interviews. It's quite possible that these episodes may find themselves becoming the individual chapters of a book. I've got a team of people that are helping me put this together, and they're amazing young millennials who are really good at this podcast thing that I'm still new at. And they tell me that if I get a book out, that maybe I can do some speaking engagements, and, who knows where this is going to go. So I'm totally open to it.
So, I'm on a network of a Facebook group that is comprised of women physicians. And one of the things that will come up from time to time is how corporate medicine often encourages us to remove personal artifacts from the rooms that we, examine patients in. And so typically this kind of leads to a more general conversation about how up close and personal do each of us get with our patients. And it's very cute because typically what will happen is the responders to these types of posts will fall into two groups, one being the group of people that I think are more hurried or have to get through their workday more quickly, maybe surgeons and the like, who don't necessarily need to develop a deep personal relationship with patients. So they will say things about how they try to protect their privacy or their children's privacy. They try not to share personal stories. But then the entire other half of the group would be people like Ira and myself, and it sounds like definitely this would be you, who feel like the entire relationship is built upon sharing your story, and that when patients are able to open up and relate to the person that they're speaking to, you can get where you need to go so much more quickly. And so in one of our previous guests, we had Dr. Monica Munoz, who was she's an endocrinologist, and she mentioned kind of midway through her the podcast interview that she herself was a diabetic. And it's like, I can only imagine how that would be so helpful when you spend all day speaking to diabetic patients. And so,
but I bet very few of her patients know that.
I don't know. Yeah. I if we had more time on the show, I thought it was interesting that it didn't come up until later. And so I was just thinking about your circumstance and how, the wheelchair is one of those things that you cannot hide, right? So a lot of,
That's right.
So Dr. Monica can hide her insulin pump, and the other of us who might have a disability or any other kind of, personal story that may or may not be relevant, that we can kind of conceal that. But I would imagine that the wheelchair, in one aspect, I think potentially people might feel the wheelchair makes them vulnerable, but I would think that for you, potentially, it might make you feel powerful because it gives you that open door to just connect with people deeply from the beginning. Do you feel like that?
I totally do, Leighan. I believe that being fully present in terms of who I am in this wheelchair, this is who I am. I have not before shared personal stories quite as personal as the ones I'm sharing on Couch Stories. with my patients. So I had to kind of prepare them all that I was going to do that, actually, because I worried quite a bit about what it was going to be like for them to learn so much about me.
Tell me why.
But-
Tell me why, because this is
because
the
of
other.
the rules. It's the rules
Yeah.
of medicine, just like you talked about. Where your office is supposed to be neutral, you're not supposed to have photographs of your kids, and blah 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 blah. And that's a school of thought that kind of comes out of the analytic school in psychiatry, anyway. But I think that interpersonal therapists are a lot more present. And a lot more likely to share something real with the person. And that only helps us make a stronger connection with our patients. But the wheelchair, I have to say, has cut both ways. Sometimes people feel like they can't complain to me about something trivial because, after all, I got this big thing happen. And then other times people will say, like, well, you don't understand. And I just have to tap on the wheels with my ring and say, well, I actually think I do understand.
Right.
And that opens the door for them to begin to, tell me what their frustration is and tell me what's going on. And I think that helps them feel understood. And that's the most important part of therapy. My job is not to understand the patient. My job is to help the patient leave my meetings with them feeling understood. And I think that's what happens when you are real with someone.
Yeah. And those rules that you just mentioned are very interesting because, Ira, you actually surprised me in a previous podcast. We were talking about religion and medicine. And I think you had said something about your religion and how you specifically try to not discuss your religion because you felt like you didn't want that to be a barrier for people, that they felt I don't know where you were going with that.
I will discuss my religion with my patients, but I don't project my feelings about my religion on my patients, particularly when it comes to medication usage, vaccination, abortion, because my job is to help the patient get better, not to project my beliefs onto them. They need to formulate their own beliefs, and I need to support them with what they believe in and help them work through that process.
I imagine
I believe that's what I said on that episode.
Yeah, and I think it was too. And I imagine that in psychiatry.
If it's not, that's what I'm saying now.
Got it.
Okay.
I imagine that in psychiatry you have to be very careful about those rules because I'm sure that that fear about projecting judgment and whatnot is even stronger in your particular arena than it would be in ours. But it's funny
because I'm not talking to somebody about their pancreas.
Right.
I'm not talking to somebody about their liver. I'm often talking to somebody about their personality or their thoughts or their feelings. And so it's much, we personalize that information. We don't personalize our liver, even though it's pretty damn important. It's a very different kind of medicine.
Right. I always went with the theory the liver's not the brain, but it's not stupid. But it's not the brain. So would it be a spoiler alert if I dove a little bit into episode 2, because I thought, as powerful as your first episode was, okay, listeners, you've got to listen to Couch Stories tonight. Powerful stories. But episode 2 was literally, I was on the treadmill when I listened to that story, Dr. Mandanis. I had tears in my eyes. I almost slipped off the treadmill. And it was so powerful how you brought your life story, which was similar to the gentleman on the bridge, and how, had you not told him that story, you would have not connected with him.
It was a crazy thing. So the story you're referencing is about a suicide attempt. And if I can back up a little bit, because I'm a psychiatrist, one of the things I do is study a lot about suicide. And one of the things I studied was about children whose parents survived children who survived their parents' suicide. And I decided to study that topic. And I presented grand rounds about, what happens when a parent kills themselves. And about 4 days after my grand rounds presentation, my father killed himself. And I became one of these people that I had studied for years and years and years and years. And I intellectualized it. I was an academic. I knew exactly what was going on. I didn't have any emotions. And then, lo and behold, one day, to fast forward a little bit, I was working in an emergency room in Massachusetts, and I met this guy and his wife, and he was crying, he was depressed, but he promised he wasn't suicidal and that he wasn't going to act on his thoughts. And I hear that cracking. Sorry about you guys. We let him go home because he promised to be safe. And on my drive home from work that night, there he was about to jump off a bridge. And I stopped and picked him up and convinced him not to do it. And the way that I convinced him not to do it after I tried everything and was running out of ideas was to tell him about my father's suicide. And that story changed his life and changed mine, because after I told him the story, I wept and wept and wept and realized just how artificial I had been, how closed off I had been, how defended I had been. And that day, the story helped him and the story helped me. And that's what the second episode's about.
Now, that was years ago, and certainly psychiatry has changed in this country since that time. As we see more and more pharmaceuticals brought into psychiatry, less and less hour-long visits with psychiatrists, particularly in large institutions, more and more mid-level providers. Psychiatry is almost the mill that primary care medicine is. Where do you see the future of psychiatry in this country going?
Well, I'm scared to death. Your rant at the beginning of the episode tonight made me think that. We've become so reductionistic, and it's all about science, it's all about meds. We sort of lost the art of a connection with the patient. And in my experience, it's a biopsychosocial treatment. The biology is the medicines, but the psychology is getting to know what the person is thinking, and the sociology is understand how they relate to other people and how they relate to their communities and how they relate to themselves. Unless you have some time to put together a biopsychosocial treatment plan, you're missing 2/3 of the treatment plan. And medicines can only take people so far. That's a big part of Couch Stories. I think that a good story is what could really make the difference. So I'm really worried about the future of psychiatry in that regard. Child psychiatry, on the other hand, we still do a lot of therapy. We joke among ourselves that we are the most fully trained of psychiatrists because we study therapy of the family, therapy of the child, therapy of the adult. And that, thankfully, is still a big part of child psychiatry. But the advent of easy to prescribe, low side effect medications has changed the face of psychiatry. And the truth is, those medicines are not prescribed mostly by psychiatrists. Most of those medicines are prescribed by primary care physicians.
That's interesting. And you and I spoke this morning also about the need for that resilience, that grit, that struggle, that overcoming conflict helps people grow. And
absolutely.
It
makes them smarter too. I can't tell you how many times I work with a teenager who complains to me about how hard chemistry is. I hate chemistry. Chemistry's so hard. And the only way that I can convince them, if they're a historian or if they, plan on being an English major, to continue to struggle with chemistry is to help them understand how struggling with chemistry, even if they're never going to do it again, is going to help their brain be smarter for all the other things they really do care about.
Do you find that our current youth, millennials up to the present, aren't allowed to struggle enough, and they aren't allowed to develop enough conflict because mom and dad tend to get in the way because they want their kids to have it easier than they did. But yet when that happens, they can't handle the situation that isn't perfect, so to speak?
Well, I think that's true for a certain group of people, and I have to say those are the privileged people. I think that people who aren't so privileged continue to struggle quite a bit and learn from their struggles and develop a lot of resilience and grit. I mean, I only think of resilience as an unusual thing in human beings. I actually think it's common. Our desire to survive and to overcome is so strong, most of us are able to figure it out. But among privileged kids, I think you're right. They have, it's one of the casualties of privilege to not have the skills from early childhood for dealing with a situation that's frustrating, for dealing with a situation that's difficult, because most of, privileged kids don't. Their parent can prevent it from happening and buy them what they want, and they don't experience a whole lot of frustration until they get to be teenagers and young adults, and lo and behold, mom and dad can no longer prevent them from experiencing frustration, and at that point in life, they haven't developed the skills yet to deal with it. And so that's what I see a lot of.
How do we change that?
Let kids struggle. Let kids fall. Let kids figure it out. Stop running in and rescuing them. I mean, imagine what our world would be like if little kids who are learning to walk, I mean, you know how that is. When a little kid learns to walk, what do? They pull themselves up, they take a few steps, and then they fall. They don't quit. They don't say, I've tried this walking thing and it didn't work out for me. I think I'm going to sit right here and wait for somebody to pick me up. No, little kids don't have fear. They want to walk like everybody else. So they get up and they try again, and they get up and they try again until they master it. Imagine what our world would be like if we picked those kids up the first time they fell and carried them. They would get to be pretty big in our arms and never learn to walk. So I really do think that one of the most important skills of being an excellent parent is to just let go and watch your kids and trust your kids and comfort them when they struggle, but not necessarily characterize the struggle as bad or take the struggle away. Just because the teacher is assigning a difficult assignment to you doesn't mean she's a bad teacher. I think that would be an important start.
I think that's excellent advice for all of our listeners and for society in general. Can you give us a glimpse into future episodes? I mean, I've listened to episode 1. I've listened to episode 2. What can we look forward to?
Well, the next 2 episodes are going to be the last of my sort of autobiographical episodes. I don't want Couch Stories to be, the Perry Mandanis memoirs, but I do want people to get to know me as a real person. And so the first 4 episodes, I'm telling some very personal stories. The next one is actually about the grandmother that Ira. If I can quickly give you a sneak peek, this woman arrived into the United States at Ellis Island with her family to join their father, who came years before them to establish a business as a restaurant and earn enough money to build a house, furnish it, and call for his family to come over. And the day they arrived in Ellis Island, the Red Cross pulled them aside from all the other immigrants that had just gotten off the ship and let them know that their father had been murdered that day, or rather the day before. The dishwasher in his restaurant killed him the day before his family arrived.
Wow.
That's the beginning of her story and how resilient she became. And so that's episode 3. Episode 4 is going to air on Valentine's Day, so it's going to be about love. And then I'm going to begin doing interviews of some very interesting characters and people, authors who have written books about story and storytelling, another author who has overcome a major medical life struggle herself, the headmaster of a local high school who is going to talk with us about exactly what we just finished talking about, which is, resilience in our young people and how to help them build it, and what he's doing with his curriculum to do that. So I'm moving into the interviews once people get to know me as a person.
That's great.
That's what's up next.
I cannot wait to hear both of those episodes. I can definitely see Couch Stories as a book, perhaps, as we said earlier, Couch Stories on a coffee table. I think that would be great. And you could maybe water it down, perhaps maybe put some of the couch stories on decaffeinated coffee tables. But
we have like a minimum
yeah, we
amount
have-
of puns.
yeah, we have a minimum amount of puns on
Right,
this
yeah,
show
he doesn't-
just to keep the
pun
audience
threshold.
listening. But Dr.
That's what it
Mandanis,
is.
you have been an incredible guest on our show this week.
Thank you.
We'd love to have you back after the next couple episodes, talk to you again. I can't wait to come up and see you. We need to get together again soon. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. And for those of
Thank
you out
Leanne.
there,
Thank you, Ira.
tune
Yeah,
in next
you are.
week right here at WSDU, or listen to some podcast on Podbean or on iTunes. We're here at Paradox. Good day, Leanne.
Good day.